any responsibility for doing health and safety, management of any kind at your local union or district council, this is going to help build that foundation as well. And what's in here is really the nuts and bolts of what you want to be able to understand, teaching classes that relate to chemical exposures, chemical harm, things like that. It's pared down. It's not like a full college course, obviously, in toxicology, but for trainers, this is the nuts and bolts of the stuff that we want to know. And again, as usual, we're going to go through this. We're going to try to have it be as interactive as possible. There might be some terms and definitions that you haven't seen before. And the things that I have up here, you want to be able to get comfortable and understand these things. In fact, I'm going to use that word memorization. Some of these things you're going to want to remember going forward, because they are those fundamental building blocks of toxicology. But they're not, and it's applied to our work. And as I've said before multiple times, there are so many chemical exposures that IUPAT members are in front of, whether you're a painter, floor cover, wall cover, glazer, there's chemicals all around that we deal with. So this is a really good course. We do have an activity that's at the end of the class. Now there's a module that I developed for this too, to go along like a student manual, and it does contain the activity in it. I can't remember what we did last time, if that whole manual was sent out with the activity or just the activity, but we'll get that to you as our course is going on. And we'll go through it just as a group. We won't do breakout rooms because we've only got a few people. And the activity connects directly, here's my one prop, to the pocket guide. I've said many times, in my 26 years, this is probably the most used book in my library. I use it all the time, and we're going to spend some time in it on the health effect side of things for this activity as we're going forward. So with that said, let's find out who we have here. Oh, actually, Nicole, you want to do the admin thing first?
Yep, absolutely. Just as usual, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt Bernie. You can put your questions in the chat if you're able to. I'll be looking at the chat to make sure that it can be as interactive as possible. Obviously, this is another FTI sponsored class. It's FTI 1149. There is a survey at the end of the class that we'd like you to take on the LMS. If you guys have any issues taking that survey, please reach out to us, either me directly or FTI International, and we'll be happy to get that patched up for you. Everything should be working smoothly with the upgrades to the LMS. We tested it this morning and everything seemed to be good to go. But if you guys have any questions or concerns regarding that, we want to make sure that we can give Bernie some good feedback as he continues to develop and give these classes for us. So any feedback that you have is greatly appreciated. And I think that's probably about it, Bernie. I will be sending you guys to your email the manual that Bernie referenced, and the activity is at the very end of the manual, last couple of pages for the activity today. So I'll work on doing that in the background for you.
Thank you, Nicole. All right, who do we have here today? Who's joined us? Hey. Oh, you're on mute, Jesse.
Yeah, no, I was
okay.
trying to get them both to go working at once. So Jesse Bizzorni from Orlando, Florida, DC 78, training coordinator for the commercial painting side. Do a lot of scenic painting. Helped us come up with our scenic curriculum, as I was saying earlier. And I try to do all these classes I can. Try to learn, especially on this side, because I know a lot about the commercial painting. So I'm really trying to take in everything I can on the health and safety or rigging or industrial side, trying to make it so I know more about everything. So.
Great, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, who else we got?
Hey everyone, my name's Chantel. I'm a trainer out of Canada, Edmonton, Alberta, actually, with District Council 17. I kind of dibble and dabble here and there. I'm a trainer and I also work for one of our signatory contractors during the industrial season. So I kind of get to spread the knowledge all around to the frontline workers and also the guys that get in for training. So it's a nice little balance.
All right, welcome. And Chantel, can you see the screen okay?
Yeah, I can see. I'm actually just on my way home, so I promise I'll turn my video on when I get there.
Okay. Please get home safely. All right, who else we got? Is that it?
There are two other people. There's one other number and then a Ronald.
Yeah, Angelo's here. He's on the phone, and then Nuno's trying to log in right now.
So I'll say hello to Ronald again. He's one of our folks behind the scenes here that keep the gears greased, as you would say. All right, so I guess, Nicole, if somebody comes in, if you want to just give them a heads up, they can say hello, who they are and stuff. So no need to worry, everybody. I'm a real world toxicology field expert. So
That's great.
oh boy, I wonder when I can go to a Jimmy Buffett concert
You know,
again.
you can drink your way around the world in Epcot, right?
Oh yes, yeah. Although as good a shape as I am, I notice that I start to slow down as that happens.
Yeah, it makes it hard to get around the world.
I throw this up because, toxicology is, we all have experience with it. If we've ever had something to drink, if you've had medicine of any kind to make you feel better, things like that. So, and again, I like to apply my science. So this was at a Buffett concert, I think, before I had kids. But anyway, that was a long time ago. I don't have that hat anymore, by the way. But you know what was good about that hat? At the concert venues, you can't bring your own booze in. So I found this hat actually had enough room so I could throw little nip bottles of tequila in there, and then I got to mix my own drinks inside. Just saying, it's again, functional, practical, real world experience. So in this module, you're going to learn what toxicology is and why it's important for protecting workers, the different measures of toxicology, different disease that chemicals can cause, and what toxicologists do. Look, if you've taught, anything from a respiratory protection class, if you do HAZCOM, especially HAZCOM, all this stuff is really relevant. If you teach welding, if you do ventilation stuff, again, all this is very applicable because underneath all those things, why we protect people, it's due to the toxicology of stuff. On completion, we'll be able to give a definition of toxicology, list at least 3 historical points in toxicology's development, define dose response, state 4 routes of exposure, and explain major components of toxicology. And again, this stuff's all going to be related to courses that we teach or work that we do. So with that said, how would you define toxicology? What do you think it means? I'll give you a hint. If you know what ology is, you can figure out the rest of it.
So like the study of toxic materials in your system?
You were really muffled, Jesse.
The study of toxic materials or chemicals in your system?
Yes, yeah. So ology is the study of, so zoology, the study of animals, herbology, the study of plants, toxicology, the study of toxics. And specifically the study of toxins, in the human body. There's a few terms that I'm going to use here. I might call them poisons. I might call it a toxicant. I might call it a xenobiotic. Those are all different words for chemicals that once they get into our body have some kind of effect. And this stuff, there's all kinds of examples around this in the regular world. This thing on the left here is a scanning electron microscope photo of Aspergillus mold. And if you did the mold class with me, we know that Aspergillus penicillium is one of the real nasty ones. Can cause some severe health effects. Poisonous water hemlock here, this nice bright green plant, the most poisonous plant in North America. Poisonous dart frog, I have this in there because, hey, who would have thought, what a pretty looking frog, come here you, and next thing you know, you're paralyzed. Bacteria, they can produce different types of actual chemical byproducts from their biological processes that can harm us. Lead, something that, a lot of us are probably familiar with. These are all examples of toxins and why we need to understand toxicology. So what are some of the IUPAT's trade tasks that may expose our members to chemicals?
Well, I'd say the big one for us is applying any industrial coating or
Yep.
removing it for that matter.
Yep. And there's a real good avenue of exposure right there. And as you know, for the folks who did the chemical class with me, once you apply something to a surface and you spread out that surface area, that's going to relate to how fast something evaporates. So just in the nature of coating something, you're going to make that material more volatile. So it's a good idea to understand how it could harm you. Good work. What else? What's another example of a trade that could or a task that would affect our members?
Something that I think we don't think about, like we have to do a lot of cleaning in here in Florida before I paint something. Sometimes I have to clean off like mildew and other gross stuff. I mean, obviously you have to sand down coatings, but then even just cleaning can sometimes be dangerous depending on like the mildews or the molds growing. I've seen some
Yeah.
funky stuff growing here in Florida before, and I had to clean it off.
So that's a good point, Jesse. So how often do you have to prep a surface, before you put a coating down? And is
Pretty
it
much every time.
pretty much every time? And is it just soap and water you use?
It depends. If I'm dealing with calcium deposits, I'll have to use something specifically to break up the calcium. If it's a mildew or a mold, we'll use something for mold or mildew specifically. Sometimes we just use a basic cleaning product like Simple Green. We try to use that more often, but like say, I know I deal with the, well, I just said it a second ago, the calcium deposits a lot, and those are tougher to break down. And we have to use chemicals to break those down.
Yeah. Now, how about metals? How would you clean metals off if you have to apply a coating to them? What if they're greasy?
Yeah, an anti-grease
Yep.
component of some sort. Those are pretty heavy duty.
Yep. And all of those are organic compounds. They're all organic solvent based. They're all very volatile, and they happen to be fat soluble. And we'll get into why that's important in a little bit. Any other examples? Do we have any floor covers or drywallers, tapers? Anybody on?
I just wanted to give you the breaking news that Nuno has entered the building.
Oh,
Watch out, I am here.
here we go.
How are
Welcome,
you,
Nuno.
everyone? Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy. Is it Nuno?
Too early to tell.
Too early to tell. All right, Nuno, just want to say hello to everybody, introduce yourself and what you do, and how come you're taking this class?
Hey, everyone. So my name is Nuno Portella. I'm with the FTI of New Jersey at District Council 711. I'm a full-time health and safety coordinator. I have been for about 8 years, and I've been in the union for about 15 years as a commercial painter by trade. My mission is basically to take up as much knowledge as I can to help all our members stay safer out on the field. So any class I could take and any information I could absorb, I could pretty much transfer back to them and make them better mechanics, as well as making them safer out on the job for themselves and their families.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, welcome. So do we have any other examples of trades in the IUPAT or tasks within a trade that would expose that member to chemicals? So we covered coating something or cleaning surfaces before you coat. What else?
Just mixing a coating can, if you accidentally spill any of stuff that you've mixed up, a lot of the coatings might have something like a thinner that needs to, and often the thinners are very, not good for you.
Yep, that's right. Mixing paints, mixing coatings, floor covers, adhesives, the cleaners that they might use, wallpaper. Like I said, there is no IUPAT trade that I can think of that does not come in contact with chemicals, even trade show workers. I'm sure that we can find a fairly good list of things that they probably use in their work that are chemicals. So I just got a couple examples here. If you do any welding, cutting, any hot work, that's going to expose you to a whole different realm of chemicals. Toxicologists. So what do these folks do? What does a toxicologist do? I can tell you they really helped me out, that's for sure. So these folks, they look at studying chemicals, how they harm the body, but they want to develop what we call here a mechanistic understanding of how chemicals affect the living system. So they don't just want to say, toluene is bad for you. They don't want to just say, benzene can cause cancer. They try to figure out exactly how that chemical causes its harmful effects once it gets into the body. So they look at the mechanism of action. And that's really important because that helps us understand, if there's any particular population vulnerabilities, if it's going to interact with other chemicals and cause different kinds of damage, what safe levels of chemical exposure, if any, are. So understanding the mechanisms of toxicology are very important. And that's the kind of the end goal of what a lot of toxicologists do. And all of their study and research, I get to get that information. And then that allows me to look at all the chemicals that, IUPAT members work with and say, hey, this stuff's really risky. I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to find how many people use it, how do they use it, and I'm going to see what the risk of exposure is. So that'll help me kind of target where I should, target some resources, because we don't have unlimited resources, right? So it's a way to help me do risk assessments. So here's some important terms. So elimination rate is the amount of time it takes for half of the xenobiotic or toxicant to be eliminated from the body. And then body burden is the amount of harmful chemical that is left inside a person's body. So one of the problems is, we take in a chemical. Some of it is going to leave our system and some of it is going to stay behind. It's that amount that stays behind that can affect us long term. And as the chemical is on its way out of our system, it can also cause damage as well. But the problem is if we keep getting exposed to something day after day, work shift after work shift, this body burden can increase, and we do not want that. So, some chemicals have particularly long half-lives. For example, lead's half-life is, I think, 27 days. So half of the amount of lead in your body, if you took it in, would be removed after 27 days, and half of it would be left. Asbestos fibers, I think chrysotile is 77 days in the lung. So you can also have half-life for your whole body. You can also have it for different organs. Toxicology, it might be the oldest scientific discipline that we have. Why do you think that would be true?
Because we've always been eating things bad for us on accident or on purpose sometimes, like with the mushrooms.
Yeah, let's see. You sometimes you're hard to hear, Jesse. I don't know if
I was about to say, I'm going to switch my internet real quick because I think I'm on the wrong network right now, and I think that's what's affecting it.
Okay. I hear you're clear there.
Yeah, you might lose me for a second. I'm going to switch my internet because I think I'm on the wrong network right now, and that's one of the issues. Okay, I'll be right back. Cool.
So anybody else want to take this up? Why do you think this was the oldest discipline, the oldest scientific?
I'll take a stab at it. I'm guessing people started getting sick and they kind of wanted to figure out why.
Yeah.
And when they figured out some substances, they kind of wanted to study how they're functioning in the body.
Yep. And what's one of the ways that people would get chemicals into their body way back when?
Well, I know a big one with lead was like the ancient Romans used to make it their cups, the linings out of them and whatnot. So the aqueducts were lined, getting into their bodies that way.
Yeah, you made it to the high pinnacle of society in Rome when you could drink your wine out of a leaded cup, let me tell you. But something more even basic, right? We ate food. Just like, kids, they know what's edible and what's not by putting it in their mouth. So some foods that we would eat. This here is an example on the left is an oyster mushroom, delicacy, very edible, as opposed to destroying angel here on the right. It looks kind of similar, but if you eat this, you might not make it. One of the reasons why I don't, my father, I remember driving places with him. He would stop the truck, get out, go grab mushrooms, go back and fry them up with bacon. I would never attempt that. I just guess I didn't pay attention enough when I was a kid, but every year we have a number of poisonings that happen in the US due to folks who go out and practice mushroom gathering. 100,000 folks every year hit poison control centers because they eat, mushrooms that they should not have eaten.
That's actually my new hobby is mycology study, hunting mushrooms and identifying mushrooms. I haven't really eaten any I found, but I go around and search for them now here in Florida. So that I started doing over the pandemic because I was stuck at home. But I don't eat them. I'm just going around and identifying for fun.
Yeah, you either know you're really good at it, or either you're really courageous, or the opposite of courageous if you try eating them. So it's definitely an acquired skill, to be sure. So how do we find out what is toxic these days? Please don't say eating it.
Yeah, no, well, we have so many fancy computers, and I know that they can take a sample of something and figure out exactly what all is in it.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, you have different information avenues. One of the most common ones that we use now is our SDS, is your safety data sheets. Will give
Yep.
you stuff about toxicity and everything that you're using, especially with chemicals.
Yep. Yeah. So that's an example of getting some information at our end, right, in the field. How about like toxicologists? What are some ways that they can find out what's toxic?
Testing.
Yeah. What kind of testing do you know? There's two distinct different groups of testing.
Okay. So scientific testing, they do all
Yep.
kinds of research.
Yep. Research. So one, we just sort of had a lot of media attention on, right? We did a vaccine trials. So pharmacology is toxicology. It's just that the pharmacology, they're only concerned about the benefits of chemicals in our body to help us, whereas toxicology looks at everything. So we can do two things. We can do research on humans, and we can do research on animals. And doing research on animals is expensive, but it can be done quicker. Research on humans, not so easy to do. There's a lot of ethical issues with that. Not to mention, it could take a while depending upon the type of tests that you do. So one of the things that we do is we study epidemiological data. So epidemiology is the study of diseases and poisons. And that's one way that we can link exposures back to toxicology. So what an epidemiologist would do in conjunction with a toxicologist is they would say, look at, a certain trade, a certain job, and they would look at diseases in that trade. And they would say, okay, well, we have these kinds of diseases. What chemicals did they work with? And then they work backwards and discover that, certain chemicals may have caused those diseases. Then they hand that off, and a toxicologist can do the study of that. So that's a long process, though. And unfortunately, when we do epidemiological studies, workers are the guinea pigs, workers are the lab rats, or the public are the lab rats. How many times have you heard a news story where there was a cancer cluster in a neighborhood, right? And then they went in and did some research and found out that there was a chemical that was exposing either the drinking water or something like that in the soil. So there's two ways. We can look at human studies and we can look at animal studies. This dates back a long time, as far back as early BC times. We found Chinese journals contained plant and fish poisons. So they were at least starting to categorize, fishes and plants where if they were eaten, it would cause a poisonous reaction. Back in Egyptian times, we see that there was directions for collecting and actually preparing the administration of more than 800 different kinds of, medicines, beneficial medicines and poisons. So now they're starting to kind of put two and two together, right? And figure out what they can do with the chemicals to affect the body. Back in ancient in Greece, physicians classified over 600 plants, animal and mineral poisons. And then in Rome, we started to see chemicals used as poisons for executions and assassinations. And again, somebody mentioned, the leaded goblets and things like that and decanters for wine. That took place in Rome. 1200 AD, we saw the Spanish rabbi Maimonides wrote an actual book on poisons. And also the antidote for how to cure somebody who got poisoned. Then we get to one of the modern day fathers sort of toxicology, dosis facit venetum. This phrase means in Latin, the dose makes the poison. All substances are poisons. There is none which is not a poison. The right dose differentiates a poison from a remedy. So this was Paracelsus. And he's responsible for giving us the dose response curve, which we're going to look at in a moment. And this is quite true, right? If you look at the vitamin that you might take, your daily vitamin, you might see that you have copper in there. Our bodies need a little bit of copper to function. But if we get too much, we start to have a toxic effect to that, and it starts to affect our neurological function. Calcium, another good example. If we have a weak calcium intake, our muscles don't relax as easy because we need calcium in our muscles to relax them after they're contracted, and our bones could be weaker. So we need calcium, but if we get too much calcium, we can have calcium growth deposits on our bones, and that can cause problems as well. So at 1542, we saw some standards now start to be published. So this is in a wood cutting from an actual pharmacy back in Nuremberg, Germany. And it indicated some standards for drugs that were established at the time. So in other words, what would you give a person and how much should you give them to cure what was ailing them? 1713, the Italian physician Ramazzini published De Morbis Artificium. This guy, Ramazzini, was kind of like the modern day practitioner of industrial hygienists. He was our first one way back when. He looked at stone cutters, chimney sweeps, did a lot of work with connecting chemicals that those jobs worked with to ailments that they suffered. In modern times, we start, well, modern, I guess, for 1800, we see this Marsh test was used by this Spanish physician, Ophelia, in a very high public case back then where this woman poisoned her husband. And he was able to use this Marsh test to discover that he was indeed poisoned with cyanide. I'm sorry, with arsenic. And now we're in the 20th century. Well, we're not anymore, are we? No, 21st century, like the Steve Miller song. So Paul Ehrlich developed a staining procedure to observe cell tissue and pioneered the understanding of how chemicals now are influencing organisms. So now they can actually see with their eye, right, through different means, what chemicals are going to do to the body. Instead of observing it on the outside of somebody, we're starting to be able to look at the cellular level now, how chemicals affect us, and that leads into a mechanistic understanding of toxicology. Silent Spring, who's Rachel Carson? Rachel Carson, who's she? Anybody have heard of her before? Very important woman. Back in the 40s and 50s, she was studying environmental pollutants. You might have heard of the issue that occurred with the bald eagles where their eggshells were so thin, a chick could never get developed and hatch in it. They would die. The eagles would sit on it, crush it. That was due to DDT, something that we used to spray our kids with. If you ever looked at any videos from the late 40s and 50s, you could see school children walking out and through a glorious cloud, white cloud of DDT aerosol to prevent lice spreading in schools. And this stuff was a pretty nasty chemical. But she did a lot of work with environmental poisonings and environmental toxicology. So with that said, these two things kind of go together. We have occupational toxicology and environmental. And these two things are kind of married together. And again, I can't say it enough. I don't know of an IUPAT job that's not connected somehow to chemical use. So what does it look like today? So we've got a lot of different organizations up here. Some of them study chemicals and their effects on the body, more traditional toxicology type work. Others use what toxicologists do to create standards, and some do all of it together. So we've got the EPA does work like that, the CDC. Here we've got a professional organization, the Society of Toxicology. Of course, there's NIOSH, right? The folks who developed this handy dandy pocket guide. So they're the education and research branch for OSHA. So they do work like that. We apply toxicology in the food that we eat. So the FDA, right, has limits. and they use toxicology for what they consider to be safe levels of chemicals in our food. Any comments or questions so far? So that's kind of, what the stuff is, where it came from, and what kind of fields we have that help us understanding how chemicals affect us. With that said, what's the difference between dose and exposure? Are these two words, do they mean something different, or are they the same thing?
Well, you could have a dose as exposure. I just think the major difference between them, one of them is done on purpose. The other one could be accidental as far as exposure, or it could be just something that you take in because you are in the same environment where these chemicals may be concentrated.
Okay, so the phrase that you said, Nuno, what you take in, that's very important. So there is a difference between these two things, and we need to make sure that we're clear on that, because it's important for how we're going to protect members out in the field. So dose is the amount of chemical that you get into your body. So it's the actual amount that you take in, whether it be, through inhalation or an injection. You might be familiar with a dose of medicine that you take, right? I take a 500 milligram dose of, ibuprofen or acetaminophen, right? My Tylenol. Exposure, on the other hand, is what's around us. So you can be exposed to something and not necessarily have a dose. But it goes without saying, and goes with common sense, that if your exposure is there, there's the potential for a dose, right? And as exposure goes up, the potential for your dose goes up as well. What's one of the ways that you can prevent a dose of a chemical, even though if you're being exposed to it? What's one of our worker health and safety modes, that controls that we can use?
Air monitoring, respiratory protection.
Exactly. So we can use air monitoring to figure out what the concentration is, and then you can select a respirator to prevent that exposure from entering our actual breathing zone and turning into a dose. So it's important. That's why, and again, these two things you can measure both of these, right? We can measure dose, but it's hard because we have to enter the body to do that. We have to take, a blood sample, a urine sample, hair sample, something like that. And sometimes we might have to do a calculation because by the time that chemical got in our body, it metabolized or transformed to a different chemical. But if we know about it, then we can kind of back calculate what the exposure likely was, but not all the time. We can also measure exposure, and that's a lot easier. Just like you said, we can do air monitoring. That's easy to do. I can just go and hang pumps on somebody, use a PID meter, look at what's around the air. And then from there, right, we can match that up to these exposure limits. And the exposure limits are based on what exposure is likely going to lead to a dose that's going to be harmful for that worker. And that's what they do, is because we can measure exposure. We can have an industrial hygienist go out and measure exposure, but we can't really have them go out and measure a dose all the time. It's not practical. And the other issue with that, if I'm measuring a dose from a worker, what does that mean? What does that mean for that worker to have occurred already? If I'm measuring a dose, so let's say I take a blood lead sample, right? And I find lead in there. What does that mean?
That means it's been exposure or overexposure.
There's been exposure, and it means that that exposure turned into a dose. So it's in their body already. I'm sorry, Nuno, but looks like the controls I recommended didn't work. Your blood lead level 60, right? You don't want to hear that. That means that it already got in our body. So we try to measure exposure, and we head that dose off at the pass by implementing a control.
Does that mean I can work from home now because my levels are on and I get paid 18 months? Or up
You
to?
still want to work, if you still want to work from home, be my guest. Hey, actually, I'm pretty excited. I'm teaching the class today from my dining room instead of my office. This is like a huge deal, actually.
I was going to say, I like your new background.
Yeah, I got different windows I'm looking at now. I mean, this is a real upgrade. I gotta put in a thank you to the boss, which would be my wife. Thank you for taking the office today. This is good stuff. Yeah, so exactly. So now I want to cover some fundamental rules of toxicology. And these are important to understand the risk of harm to a worker. So first, exposure has to occur for the chemical to present a risk, right? Can we agree on that? So if I can remove that chemical from being around the worker, they have no risk to harm from it, right? And we've got some ways that we can do that, right? Like ventilation, substitution, right? There are some methods for doing that. Oop. Secondly, the magnitude of risk is proportional to both the potency of the chemical and the exposure. Oof. All right, so what does this mean? So the magnitude of the risk, another good word for magnitude is, the height or the amount, right? So what's that amount of risk there? Risk is what? What does the word risk mean?
Could be danger, gamble.
Gamble, I like that, gamble. Gamble is risk is the gamble, the likelihood, the probability of something occurring. In this case, we're looking at harm, right? So, the level of harm, or I should say the level of probability or the level of gamble is proportional to both the potency. So proportional means what? If one thing goes up, the other thing goes up. If one thing goes down, the other thing goes down. Proportional is the opposite of inversely or inverse. So inverse means if one goes up, one goes down, right? But proportional means if one goes up, the other goes up, or down and down. Those work together. So potency, another way to say potency is strength, right? For instance, you're probably familiar with this from way back when you did like a high school or junior high health class. A can of beer, a 12-ounce can of beer is equal to one shot of liquor, right? Or one glass of wine. They're all different volumes, but they equal the same effect on the body. So, the potency of those things is different. That's why you need more beer to have the same potency as one shot of liquor. So let's look at this. So, magnitude of risk. So the amount of risk is going to be directly. Another good way to say proportional is directly related to the strength of that chemical and the exposure. So we already discussed exposure, what's around us. So as exposure goes up and as a chemical's strength goes up, that's going to increase our risk up, right? Now, this is when I wish I had like an easel chart or a whiteboard or something. Just because you have a high, how can I do this without writing it out? Okay, just because you don't have a high exposure doesn't mean you're not going to have a high magnitude of risk. Can somebody give me an example?
I'm not sure if this applies to what you're asking, but it's like comparing your exposure to MEK and benzene, for example.
Yes, yep, you're right on it. So MEK, if I look at, well, we'll do it like this. I'll look up MEK here in my pocket guide. I know it's in the back appendix. MEK, page 36.
What is it, on the butanone, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah. 2-butanone. Good memory, Nuno. Let's see. All right, so I'm going to use IDLHs. So the IDLH for 2-butanone or MEK is 3,000 ppm. And remember, the IDLH is the level of exposure at which you could suffer irreversible health effects or death. None of those are good. And then we'll look at benzene. Luckily, you pick two that begin with a B. So thank you. That's right around the corner here. That IDLH is 500. Okay. So that's a big difference, 3,000 to 500.
Yeah, that's
So just because you might be exposed to 10 ppm of benzene doesn't mean there's no great magnitude of risk, right? But let's take MEK. Just because, the potency of MEK is less than that of benzene, you could still have a great magnitude of risk if what happens?
to get it on you?
Your exposure.
Yeah, if the exposure goes up to those not as potent chemicals, your risk goes up, right? So that's why it's really important that when we're working with chemicals, that there's an industrial hygienist or somebody there that has evaluated their exposures. Because you can look at something and say, oh, how many people here have used acetone? I mean, there's an example of a chemist that drank 400 milliliters of acetone one time to see what it would do to him. Well, it didn't kill him, so he survived it. But literally, no
That's
pun
commitment.
intended. What's
That's
that?
commitment. That's commitment.
That's work commitment. I don't know if he got a bonus. Acetone, so its IDLH is 250 ppm, so it's even less toxic than MEK. But that's something that you could literally drink. It doesn't mean that it's not going to have a magnitude of risk, because if your exposure is so high, right, when you're in that work environment, your risk goes up. So we got to be careful. Just because it's not a potent chemical does not mean it's not going to harm us. If our exposure is high enough, it's going to harm us, and vice versa. Just because you're looking at benzene and you say, oh, it's only 5 ppm, no big deal. Oh, really? It gives you cancer. So I think 1 ppm is a big deal, right? So we have to look at it like this. And the last thing is the amount of chemical at a target site determines toxicity. What does this mean? So the amount of chemical that actually reaches our target organ, whether that's a whole system, one organ or whatever, maybe it's your lungs, maybe it's your kidney, the amount that actually reaches there, that is what is going to cause the toxicity of it. What do I mean? Let's go to alcohol. So the kind you can drink. So when we drink alcohol, our body metabolizes it to acetaldehyde and tries to get rid of it. The alcohol that it can't get rid of, the stuff that stays alcohol, gives us that fun, love, and feeling, right? However, as long as you're drinking slowly, or you have a tolerance to it to some level, or you're a certain size, or you're drinking a lower proof alcohol, your body can keep up, and it can metabolize that stuff fast enough where you don't feel like you're inebriated. Same thing goes for the long health effects of alcohol, cirrhosis, fatty liver. As long as your liver can keep up with metabolizing it and clearing it, so you're giving yourself enough of a break in between, binge drinking, you're not going to have a toxic effect. However, if you drink too much too fast, your body can't keep up, then you feel that toxic effect. So you feel drunk, or you start to develop cirrhosis. So when you look at these 3 rules of toxicology together, it can help you identify risk to a worker. Well, what does that mean? So maybe they're working with, an organic solvent to clean a surface before you paint. Or maybe you're using it as a thinner before to get your coating ready. Maybe you're doing that in a hot environment, so the evaporation rate is going to be higher, and you're doing a large surface, so the exposure and evaporation is going to be probably higher than normal. And you know that it's fat soluble, so it can get through your skin. And then you can look at what that actual chemical does to the body. If it's really harmful, you might be, oh boy, I got to make sure I'm protecting this worker from getting exposure. So you can do this by applying these fundamental rules of toxicity and see what the risk to that worker might be, along with the chemical properties of that chemical. So let's look at what I was talking about there with drinking. So here's our dose response curve that guy Paracelsus invented. We use something like this model to help set our exposure limits and to look at what's toxic to our bodies. So what this is it's a model that says we can tolerate some amount of a chemical in our body, right? So here, if you see on the left side, I've got response seen in a population. So science is cruel. It doesn't really care about, what happens to me or what happens to Nuno or Chantel. It's going to lump us all together, and it's going to look at us as a group. And so we're going to look at the response that's going to be seen in our group or population, and we're going to see what occurs and at what levels that occurs at. So at some point, we're going to introduce a chemical here into our body. So our dose is going to go up, 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 up. And at some point, we're going to start to see a response, whether it be, feeling lightheaded, feeling sick, feeling nauseous, having some kind of molecular chemical reaction in our cells, whatever they're looking for. The population is going to start to see this response. At first, it might just be one or two of us. As the dose keeps going up, more and more people are going to probably be seeing that same reaction. And at some point, if the dose is high enough, every single person in that population, that study group, is going to be seeing the effects. That's what's called the dose response curve. We can look at it back to booze, right? So probably, everybody can have, a beer or a shot of liquor or something like that and not completely feel inebriated or start to show signs of drunkenness. Maybe at 2 shots, there's some small amount of people that start to feel drunk. You probably don't want them doing some high-end calculations, signing a mortgage paper, or driving home. At 3 shots, maybe 40% of us in the population are going to start to feel drunk. And at some point, maybe at 4, 100% of the population would feel drunk. And this changes for every chemical, for every population. You can have differences within populations for this dose response, even to the same chemical. Because do we all respond to chemicals the same way? No. Give me some examples of how we might respond differently.
For people that have been overexposed to coatings, they can get sensitization. So somebody might react to it badly when I might not have if I've taken appropriate measures.
Yes. And depending upon what kind of coat, like oil-based paints, they're known for developing multi-chemical sensitivity in that worker. In fact, I had a close colleague when I worked at UMass Lowell. His wife was an artist, and she used mainly oil-based paints, and her specialty was doing reverse painting on glass. And she developed a multiple chemical sensitivity to it, and she had to continue her work in an air line respirator with ventilation. That's the only way she continued to be an artist. Good example. And that doesn't happen to everybody the same way. What else? What's another example?
Like if a person had asthma, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear
No,
you.
you can't. I don't know why my mic's still being weird. If someone has asthma, maybe, and that they could get sicker faster from breathing in a chemical than someone else.
Yep, exactly. And I'll go back to the example of drinking alcohol for social events, right? If you're used to drinking, your body does metabolize it a little bit quicker. There's something called alcohol dehydrogenase, which is a enzyme. It's a kind of a protein in our body that is responsible for finding alcohol and metabolizing it to that acetaldehyde that I told you about and getting rid of it. If you drink on a daily basis, your body says, hey, we need to make more of this stuff. We need to make sure more of this alcohol dehydrogenase is available because I think this dude's going to be drinking again tomorrow. So that happens. So we develop this tolerance. So somebody who's used to drinking is not going to be affected to the same degree as somebody who doesn't drink. Also body weight, right? Or size of the person. A 120-pound person is going to react differently to one shot of tequila than somebody who might weigh 225 pounds. Right? That's how chemicals work.
It's kind of like we see that all the time with the guys that work with in the industrial field, basically with the lead removal. You can have 2 guys working the same environment doing exactly the same thing, having the same exposure, but one guy goes to the gym every day, has a healthy diet, and the other guy doesn't. You're going to see their levels are going to be completely different just based on their lifestyle alone.
Yeah, you can actually fudge what happens to the body a little bit with chemical exposures. Not always, and not always to the degree that could help you, but in many cases you can. We do know that lead uptake in folks who have, certain diets doesn't help them because lead is more likely to be taken up into the body. Same thing with cadmium. So there's a good example. And this is difficult because remember how I said that our exposure limits were based on that dose response model? And that dose response model looks at populations, not at individuals. So our exposure limits are designed to capture 95% of us. Well, what about the other 5% of the workers who don't fall in that protective 95%? What do you tell them? You're out of luck? Sorry, don't work here? That's not fair, right? It's not their fault that they were have this reaction that other people don't. So this becomes, this is another good example. This is a labor issue, right? This is a union issue about justice for people working around chemicals. So we got to be cognizant of that. And the ideal thing is to try to make sure that our workers don't get any exposure if we can. Use those hierarchy of controls to bring that exposure down as low as possible. Or as the attorneys would say, as low as feasible. But I don't have a law degree, so I'm an industrial hygienist. Here's another good example of differences, right? So this is a graph, a bar graph of non-fatal unintentional injury rates due to poisoning among children 0 to 19 years of age by age group between the years of 2001 and 2006. So look what happens here. This is rate per 100,000 kids, right? That's the population we're looking at. And here's, so this is the number per 100,000. So we see if they're less than 1 year old, the number was 167. Look what happens for 1 to 4 year olds. That number jumped way up for the amount of poisonings. And again, these are unintentional, 5 to 9, it drops way down. 10 to 14, it's still very low. And then at 15 to 19, the poisonings go back up. So what do you think is happening here? The difference between these age groups?
Well, in the 1 to 4 bracket, they're old enough and big enough to be able to pick things up, but not old enough to understand what it is.
Right.
I actually had an ex who, as a baby, drank bleach. Or he was not a baby; he was, I think, like 1.5 or something. And his mom kept the outfit he was wearing when he drank it because you can see the bleach stains on the front of this baby outfit or whatever. But
Boy.
accidental, of course.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jesse. It's at that age where the exploratory age happens, right? That's why our EPA and state-led rules, they have an age cutoff, right, for mouthable and chewable surfaces, right? Because these are kids that are going to be able to get up and latch onto this stuff and wipe their hands, put their hands in their mouth. All right, so that explains that age group. Yep. But what about the 15 to?
The next group, 15 to 19, that's a different type of exploratory age group there.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So there it's the pot, it's the booze, it's the pills, the other things, right?
It's the daredevil stage.
It's the daredevil stage. And again, these are unintentional poisoning. So at that age, they're like, hey, I can have this stuff. I'm invincible, but I guess I'm not invincible. Next thing you know, their parents are coming down to the ER because the kid had their stomach pumped. Yeah, right. So again, we can just act differently to chemicals because of how our bodies were made, because of our behaviors or age groups, all kinds of stuff. All right, so now let's look at median lethal dose. So this is a definition of a concentration that is going to kill 50% of the test subjects as a dose. So it has to get into their body. And this is usually animal test subjects, right? And it's a good starting point to look at how toxic something is, but it doesn't necessarily relate to worker health or worker risk, but it can. If you've got a good industrial hygienist that can work these numbers, that can help them out immensely. And I use LD50s quite a bit when I'm doing risk assessments, especially if I don't have an occupational exposure limit, in my pocket guide or on a safety data sheet. I have to go to other means. But let's look at the range of these things. So the LD50s are typically in milligrams of a toxicant or chemical per kilogram of body weight. So here's ethyl alcohol, right? The stuff we drink. You can see it's got a pretty high number compared to nicotine, right? Anybody ever see that movie, Thank You for Smoking? Based on true events. There was a scene in the movie where this guy smoked so much, some activists tried to stick a bunch of nicotine patches on him but luckily, thanks to his tolerance from smoking, he wasn't affected to a bad degree. So nicotine's actually pretty toxic stuff. But look at the black widow spider, which, by the way, an old friend of mine said, "Oh, did you ever go down to Universal Orlando and Disney?" I said, "I'm like, yeah, of course. You know those flume rides like Ripsaw Falls or Splash Mountain? Yeah. There's a lot of black widows that nest on the undersides of those." I'm like, "Great, thanks a lot. I don't do spiders. I'll do snakes. I'm the opposite of Indiana Jones. I'll do snakes all day, not spiders."
I'm actually the same way. I had no idea about that.
Yeah,
Like
oh,
Black
man.
Widows, wow.
Yeah, so I'd imagine, Jesse, hopefully, when you got members working on Disney, they have a pest mitigation plan to make sure that our
Yeah,
members.
they do, but it is Florida, and then there's just I know that they always have bite stations and stuff like that, but Florida, I mean, we have crazy bugs and
Yeah,
critters, and it doesn't matter how often your pest guy comes around to make sure pests don't get it. Just they're gonna, because especially if it's raining outside, they want to get in.
and black widows are just nasty. And then we see, one more chemical here, dioxin, TCDD. It's a pesticide. It's incredibly toxic. So you don't need much of this at all to cause a bad day. So then there's another term that we use, lethal concentration. So this is the amount of exposure around the test subject that would cause death in 50% of the test subjects. So here, like intravenously with the LD50, they would inject or through a feeding tube the test subject. Here, they would introduce something into the air, of the mice or guinea pigs or whatever it is they're using to see what those concentrations of that would lead to exposure death. You've probably heard of these words before. We have acute exposure. So this is a high exposure over a short period of time. And typically after the exposure stops, the health effect is going to mitigate itself. However, you can have such high acute exposures that you have permanent damage, like an acid burn or lung damage from an acute exposure of chlorine gas, something like that. Whereas chronic exposure are low doses over long periods of time, where if you develop a disease, you usually don't give a disease back. Diseases are things like kidney failure, liver damage like cirrhosis, nerve impairment, things like that. And these are particularly nasty because often we don't know we're getting low doses of chemicals over a working lifetime. Whereas, if you walk into, a place that has ammonia, you're going to know if it's leaking into the air right away, right? That acute ammonia exposure is going to wake up your senses. But if you're getting low exposures to things like volatile organic compounds, you might not know unless we do testing. That's why it's very important to have an air monitoring program to protect our workers. So exposures to chemicals may come from a ton of sources, such as what? What kinds of things might expose us to chemicals besides just working? Any thoughts? Well, here you've got, some animal or environmental exposures. We talked about that with our black widows. Work exposures. Here's an example. This is an unadjusted photo. This is a woman in India who is manufacturing raw asbestos fiber. And all of this white that you see is asbestos. It's raw asbestos. And this woman has no protection whatsoever. Therapeutic drugs is an example of chemical exposures. You can have emergencies, right? That can occur as well. So there's a bunch of different avenues for us to get exposures to chemicals. Again, that's why it's so important for, there's somebody, an occupational health and safety professional, to look at a job, look at work, and try to pre-plan things that are likely to happen, things that are likely to expose a worker. And then we want to plan out some controls for that before they start working. It's not a good idea to do things after the fact. We don't want that. It's never too late, of course, but we want to make sure we're doing right by workers and getting that pre-planning risk assessment done before a job occurs. So mechanistic toxicology, how do chemicals cause their toxic effects? That's what I mentioned in the beginning of the class. So what happens once, you know, the xenobiotic hits the body? Where do you think happens to it? So let's say I breathe in a chemical, it gets into me, or something got in through my eyes or my skin. What happens to it?
It hits your bloodstream and starts traveling through your body.
Yeah, good. So there's a few things that are going to occur, and typically they're going to occur all at the same time, sometimes more or less in each category, but it really depends what the chemical is and what the route of exposure is. So our bodies are going to start to metabolize it. So the major mechanism for terminating that chemical's effect in the body is going to be to metabolize it and get it out of there. Another word we might use is biotransform that chemical. It's also going to be distributed. So just like you said, it's going to hit the bloodstream. It's going to start to go throughout the body. And if it likes any specific organs, it's going to make a stop there. Lead, it's going to stop and say, hello, bones, how you doing? Right? So that's not good. And then there's excretion, which is what we want to happen if a chemical gets in our body. If it really likes our body, if it's fat soluble, it's going to stay there. If it's water soluble, it's going to get out of there. So some of the stuff might leave our body. And these things are going to be happening all together as you're getting it in. Now, it's easier if you just get one dose and your body can take care of it. But if you keep getting dose after dose after dose, right, from work shift upon work shift upon work shift, that's when we start to have a problem. The same way that, you know, if you're sitting down and you have one beer, then another beer, then another beer, you start to have a problem. It's the same way working with chemicals. That's why we want to implement that hierarchy of controls to prevent exposure in the first place. So this is a real easy model here that I've got out, a real simple one. So here we've got our skull and crossbones. So we have our poisonous exposure. It goes into our blood, and that's our dose. Right away, it's going to start to go into storing into tissue or plasma, which is the liquid part of our blood. And it's going to come from that storage area, that organ, that tissue, back and forth. It's going to happen back and forth. Some of it right away is going to be excreted. And this is important. So, you know, example, 60% of the lead that we ingest actually stays in our body. The other 40% gets excreted right away. And that's important to know. 90% of the lead that we inhale gets absorbed and stays in our body. 10% goes away. So it's a lot worse to inhale lead than it is to eat it. Now, don't go eating lead, but that's just an example of how it's important and why it's important to understand the mechanisms of toxicity for different chemicals. That's why it's real important to protect our lungs from lead, right? And then the other thing, it's going to start to metabolize right away as well. And it's going to find those organs that it's like, or sites of action, and it's going to start to interact with them right away as well. And all these things happen together. It's not linear. You don't have to go from step A to step B to step C, etc. But like I said, sometimes one of these functions might be occurring more than the other ones. For instance, when you first, take a sip of beer or alcohol, the metabolic process happens right away because you've got plenty of that alcohol dehydrogenase to start metabolizing it. But the more often you drink, then what's going to happen is the site of action is going to start to go up, because now the metabolism part is going to start to shrink because your body can't keep up. So, this model is going to sort of be fluid. It's going to adjust as exposure and dose occurs. Any comments or questions so far? We've covered a good amount of stuff. So now we're kind of coming into the last couple of parts, and you might be more familiar with some of this stuff in the next few slides. So metabolism, the object is to make the chemical agent more water soluble so we can excrete it. You're going to decrease lipid solubility. What's another word for lipid? Have you heard of this term before? Lipid means fat, so fat soluble. We don't want it to be fat soluble. For instance, all your organic solvents that you use, toluene, acetone, MEK, all those things are very lipid soluble. They're going to go right through your skin because your skin is made mostly of fat. So if you can decrease lipid solubility, you're going to reduce the amount that's going to be affecting that target organ. And then it's going to increase ionization. So what this means, it's going to affect the actual atomic molecular function of that chemical. So it's going to be less likely to interact with your cells. And that's why metabolism is very important. And again, it's got limits. And if you've got pre-existing conditions, it could have different limits for the same chemical. Even if you were sick, right? Let's say if you had the flu, your metabolic ability might be changed. So there's a bunch of things that could go on. That's why we don't want to depend on it, you know? When I was a very young industrial hygienist, I was taking off some potential lead paint from a plastered surface in one of my homes, my first home. And I knew I wasn't going to be doing it for very long. And my wife came around the corner and said, "Bernie, what are you doing? You know what you do for a living." Like, "Yeah, but I'm only going to be doing this for like 5 minutes and it's lead. And I think this amount." That was the wrong way to think. What it's like to be young and naive, right? Anyway. So have you heard of the term biotransformation? I hope so, because I just mentioned it a few slides back, but this is another word for metabolism. Different organs in our body have a better ability to do this than others. You might have heard of the phrase, the liver is the metabolic powerhouse of our body, right? It's true. So liver has the bulk of responsibility for taking chemicals that find its way into our system and making them harmless or getting rid of them. Lung, kidney, and intestine, they've got a moderate ability to transform chemicals. And then other tissues and organs have a very low potential. So every cell in our body can metabolize chemicals, but not nearly to the same degree. This liver really is the end all and be all of chemical transformation. That's why it's important to keep it healthy. So Nuno, you mentioning diet and general health. Yeah, it can certainly affect, the body's ability to keep up with a toxic dose. So this is a general toxicant metabolism model. So we're going to take those fat soluble lipophilic or fat loving, because that's what philic means. It means loving. Parent compound. So the parent compound is that actual chemical we get into our body. Okay. So example, if you mentioned benzene. So if I get benzene into my body, that's the parent compound. And phenol is the metabolite that gets excreted from my body. Benzene changes to phenol and it gets removed. So phenol is the metabolite of benzene. All right, so we get a parent compound in, it's going to metabolize. It's going to go through a chemical process and try to activate it and detoxify it so it doesn't hurt our body. Sometimes, as that process is happening, that new chemical, what we call an intermediate, is actually more toxic for us on its way out the door. And actually, benzene's a great example. So benzene, the chemical that it turns into before phenol is called an epoxide. That epoxide is very, very reactive, and it loves to react with the cells of our body. And that's the chemical part of benzene that causes cancer. Not benzene and not phenol. It's the metabolic intermediate as that process of our body is happening. But our body's got to do it. It does not like benzene. It says it shouldn't be here. We don't want it here. We're going to get rid of it. Unfortunately, the metabolic process is going to harm us on its way out. And the goal is to try to make these things hydrophilic. What's another word for hydro?
Water?
Water.
Water. Right. And what did I say philic means?
All of them?
Mwah. I'm terrible at charades.
Water.
Loving.
It's favorable.
Loving. Yeah, favorable, loving. So the body's going to try to make these chemicals water loving. If they're water loving, where are they going to go? Urine and bile. So it's going to be able to be excreted through urine and feces. Also, if it's water loving, it can be to some degree exhaled, things like that. But if it's fat loving, it's not going to get out of the body. It's going to stay around. And this happens for every chemical. Unfortunately, remember how I've said before in the past, we use, over 100,000 different chemicals in the workplace. How many of those do you think we have a good understanding of how they affect the human body? What percentage?
Maybe half.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
That
If
would
I
be
woke up
awesome.
tomorrow,
Probably about 10%,
you
15%
got
maybe.
it. Winner, winner, chicken dinner, 10%.
Wow.
Yeah. So unfortunately, again, that means that our workforce are guinea pigs, our public are guinea pigs. Now in Europe, they've got some rules that require a producer and manufacturer of a chemical to actually find out what the toxicological profiles of these chemicals are, how they harm a human and how they hurt the environment before they're allowed to manufacture it and sell it. But not true in the US. So unfortunately that relies on us, and usually it'll be a few workers getting sick or a couple of kids or something like that, and then we start to do more study of it. Yeah, so that's not good news. So we know very little about the chemicals that we work with. So the distribution of toxicants, we already talked about this. It's a process by which it goes through our body and hopefully finding its way out. Again, very lipophilic or fat-loving compounds are going to store in fat or other target organs that are fatty tissues. Calcium-like ones like lead, cadmium, these things will store in bone. Some will bind to the plasma proteins, so that liquid part of our blood, the proteins that are in there, they might stick around there. And then unbound chemicals are available to do adverse effects if they're not excreted. So what does a target organ mean? How could you define a target organ?
Basically where the chemical is going to store itself or it's going to stay.
Yeah, or do damage. It's the place the chemical likes. It's the house party they want to go to. And some chemicals have many, some have a few, some have one. And here's an example. Lead likes to store in the skeleton. It can damage the skeleton. It can also damage other systems like the nervous system, but typically isn't stored there. Mechanism of action. So these are the adverse effects that we're going to see either on the molecular, the cell. So, a bunch of molecules make up a cell, the cell level, or a bunch of cells make up an organ, and sometimes a bunch of organs make up a system. So we can actually have damage occur at one or many of these different levels in the human body. If it gets so bad that it damages the system or the organism, the human itself, now, we're in real trouble. Typically, when you see organ to system damage, we're now talking about disease. And once we have disease, often it is too late. Then you're left with managing the disease or trying to cure it. And, those things don't go so well. Molecularly, chemicals can interact with proteins, with our DNA or with RNA, and also the fatty substances in our body as well. So the kind of harm that it can do, it can either bind and damage the proteins, same thing with DNA and fats, also create something called free radicals. What that means, a free radical is where a molecule in the body is negatively charged. So it has this negative, this ion next to it. And you might have heard of, the benefits of drinking teas and things like that, or blueberries or blackberries, because they are a food that can scrub free radicals out of the body because of the chemical substances in those foods and drinks will bind to those free radicals and help remove them. The problem with a free radical is we all like to be balanced. So a molecule in your body does not like to be negative or positive. It likes to be neutral. So to not be a free radical anymore, that negative charge has to steal a proton from another molecule or atom. And when it does that, it's going to rip that structure apart. And that's how the damage can start to occur. And if it occurs only on, a very infrequent level, we're probably not going to notice it. But if it happens over and over and over again, we could likely see some kind of system damage or organ damage. And again, I give you this thought. We don't just usually get one exposure. We get exposure after exposure at our jobs. So how will they be excreted? We already gave some examples, but let's run through a list. So name off some ways that a chemical can be excreted from the body.
Sweat.
What was that?
Sweating, sweat.
Sweat? Yeah, you can sweat a chemical out. What else?
Urine, bile.
Urine, bile, yep.
Can come out through your hair.
Hair, yep. What else?
Bring it back out the way it came in. You could throw it up.
Yeah, you could throw it up. Yeah, absolutely. Also fingernails, it can come out in fingernails, and breast milk, right? Unfortunately, there's a lot of these chemicals, both parent compounds and metabolites that can transfer into breast milk and be delivered to our infants. So how the chemicals get in the body, you're probably pretty familiar with these examples, right? You can inhale them, absorb them through your skin or eyes, ingestion and injection. Occupationally, which one of these is the worst one for us?
Inhalation.
Inhalation, right. And what's the reason for that?
Like you were saying, it gets absorbed directly into the bloodstream that way, I think.
Yeah, so one of the reasons is that those cell membranes are so thin, right? That's our gas exchange reason. One of the issues of surviving COVID-19, and I'd rather survive it if I get it, is that a number of folks that survive it find that they have, oxygen transfer problems, the dissemination transfer problems in their lungs because that thin barrier now is disrupted somehow. What's another reason why the lungs are so vulnerable to exposure? Same reason why spreading out your paint on a surface is going to evaporate faster than if you leave it in an open can. Surface area. So if we were to take all those little alveoli air sacs and bronchial tubes and flatten them out on a surface, for the average adult, unfortunately, standard man, there's still no standard woman. I apologize, but we still use standard man. 25-year-old, 5'10", 170-pound white guy. That's standard man. So if we took standard man's lung tissues, flatten them out on a surface, that would cover about the size of a tennis court, which is 140 square meters. That's pretty big. So think of all that site, all that area for chemicals to interact with to get into our body. So it's the thin cell walls, and also it's that large surface area. So that's why we really got to focus on protecting our lungs. So inhalation, again, chemicals can evaporate up into the air. They can get onto surfaces. They can get distributed back up into the air. We can break chemicals down or solids down, like sanding a wall or something like that, or a floor, disperse them up in the air. Typically, we're not going to see, chemicals that are small enough to get into our lungs. If you see a cloud of chemical, that's not a good sign, right? We certainly know that there's a lot there, but you're often not going to see the chemicals. That's why we need to have a sampling and assessment plan. Absorption, so, these are things that can get onto our skin, and if they're fat soluble, they can go through it and affect our body that way. You can also have contact exposure and damage, like from acids or bases. Ingestion, of course, if we get things that we swallow. So other than that chemist that I said that drank 400 milliliters of acetone, what's the likely way that a worker is going to get chemicals into their GI tract, their gastrointestinal tract?
Food, smoking.
Yep, food, smoking. Licking your lips, and I got a great hands-on example of this when I visited the United Steelworker labor site at Carlsbad, New Mexico, at the waste isolation pilot plant, which is where we store almost all of our nuclear waste. It's stored in a mine, 2 miles or something underground, and it's in a bedrock salt. It's a salt that's down there, so that they're tunneling out. And I went down there, and immediately I could taste the salt on my lips when I licked my lips. So if you're doing anything that's producing, exposure, you're going to have this stuff on your lips, and we just naturally do it all the time. We lick our lips. You can get it in that way and ingest it. I just did it there, for God's sakes. If you don't have an adequate break and rest area, right? If some employer is expecting their workers to work right where, eat right where they're working, that's not good. And in fact, a lot of the highly toxic chemical standards that we have, like for lead, asbestos, cadmium, they require a separate and identified break and lunch area, right? Eating area for workers in that work place. This here's a photo from some workers taking a break on 9/11. The dust that this tragedy produced was unbelievable. One of my mentors was just spent a half a year going around measuring different buildings all around 9/11 ground zero and finding all the chemicals that were right on the pile, in buildings that were, a mile away from the site. Do all parts of the body absorb chemicals the same way? No, absolutely not. So this is an example of rates of absorption relative to our forearms. So this skin right here, we're going to give that a value of 1. And this is just like, some of the other things that I covered in the chemistry class, like specific gravity or vapor density. We're going to use 1 as that common number. So if the value is higher than 1, it means it's going to be absorbed faster. So we can see some areas of our body absorb things much quicker. The ear canal, right? More than 5 times the rate of absorption from our forearms. Genital area, 12 times. What's the take home here? Don't go bathing in chemicals, right? Palm of our hands, just a little bit more. But you can see that there's some areas that are more likely to absorb chemicals than others.
Hey, Bernie,
yeah.
just as far as the general part go, and this one thing that we talk about in class all the time, most people will wash their hands after they use the bathroom, not before. So that's, between the palm of your hand and your genitals, it's one way of getting that contamination up there.
And that's a big difference between an industrial hygienist and a medical doctor. We wash our hands before and after. You're absolutely right.
But I never really thought of it that way. I've just seen how dirty my hands are sometimes. Like, I'm gonna wash them once beforehand too.
Yeah, if you're putting your hands anywhere down there, man or woman, you want to wash your hands before if you are working with any kind of chemical.
Yeah, that absorption rate is surprising though. That absorption rate is very surprising to me. Yeah.
It's incredible, isn't it? Right? It's incredible. And this can be changed a little bit. How do you think I could increase the absorption rate on the body? Connect it with another hazard.
Well, I was going to say by raising your blood level, maybe, or I'm sorry, your blood pressure. Like if you've been running and your heart's beating very fast, more blood pumping through those areas.
Okay. So that'll increase respiratory uptake. Yep.
Okay.
But that's a great example for that. But let's specifically look at skin. How could I increase the rate of absorption in skin?
I would think sweating, because it opens up the pores.
Yes. So connect it to heat. So if you're going to be heating your body up and your pores open up, you're going to increase the rate of absorption. So all these values are going to go up. So what are some areas that normally get hot first? Right?
Yeah, your genitals, because they're between your legs.
Exactly. Also, even if you're just not hot, if you're subjecting your skin to a lot of water vapor, like let's say you have gloves on, or like, a chemical protective suit, anything that's going to saturate the skin with water, it's actually going to be opening up, the interstitial space.
So that makes
of not just your pores, but your skin. What's that?
I was going to say, I do have an example or a time that happened where I actually spilled MEK on me, and I don't use the chemical a lot. I don't regularly paint with it. There just happened to be a certain project where I was doing a very specialty paint, had to use it. ended up, it was already mixed in with the paint, but I spilled it on me, and it was a very hot day in the summer, and I was sweating, and it got on my clothes, and it was kind of a delayed thing too, where like at first I was like, oh, that's not good. And then like probably a full 20 to 30 seconds later is when it started to really burn. And
Yeah.
but it was bad. I had to go to the bathroom and take all my clothes off and let it like, try to clean it up some before I put my clothes back on. But yeah, and I was hot and sweaty, and it got on my clothes and then kind of spread, if you will, because my clothes were wet and sweaty.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, and not for nothing, different clothing can act like a sponge too, right? So it can actually wick things. So that that is an additive risk factor for our members if you work in a hot and humid environment, right? So depending upon what the weather's like, you could actually increase your exposure and
I'm
dose.
really going to
of a
keep that
trans-
in mind and make that clear to especially because we work in such hot conditions and we regularly get super sweaty. It's just how it is here in Florida. So, but
Yep.
I didn't realize that, and that's great information to pass along to my students to make sure they know too.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I mean, just in addition to the heat stress issue, being able to take breaks, cool off, dry your skin, things like that, it adds to more than one benefit. Injection, of course, is when you're going to actually pierce the skin and transfer that chemical directly into your bloodstream. So this is actually the worst way to get it be exposed to a chemical, because it goes directly to your bloodstream. But luckily for occupational setting, it doesn't happen that often. So we always say that, inhalation is the worst occupational exposure route. But with that said, do IUPAT members have a risk of injection of chemicals?
Yes, spray painting, big problem.
Yep.
We end up having to use cutting tools a lot. I've had to cut out specialty, with tape or whatever, because the kind of detailed work we do. I cut myself at work more than once.
Yep. Yeah, and it just might not be a cut that you notice. I mean, you can get abrasions on your skin, abrade it and things like that. That could increase injection into the skin. You might not be able to see, that you're bleeding, but it still might be a more open route to the bloodstream. Good. And again, if you're doing disaster site work as well, so like if you ever help cleaning up after a hurricane, a flood, a natural disaster, there's a lot of injection hazards. This is an example of some environmental police that, found some syringes in common trash. So if you're exposed to a chemical, do you know right away?
Not necessarily.
Good, not necessarily. So sometimes you might not. Immediate reaction can show up within seconds to minutes to hours. Delayed reaction might take 48 hours. And then chronic exposures, typically you're not going to know. Not until a disease is detected, which is unfortunate. So disease now or later. The term latency period, what does this mean?
The period of time from which it like hits your bloodstream to when it actually when you start to notice damage.
Good. Yep. Latency period. So, and we typically use it with chronic diseases. So it's the time of, first dose to onset of disease. And one of the examples we always give is asbestosis or mesothelioma, which is the very specific lung cancer of the pleural lining of the lung caused by asbestos, and it can take up to 25 years. What are some other long latent diseases?
So silicosis.
Yeah, silicosis. Yep. Any other ones?
COPD.
Yep, COPD. Yep. Good. Permanent and reversible. So sometimes tissues can reverse the damage, and even an organ. Like, what's an example of an organ that can repair some damage?
Your liver.
Yes, the liver. Pretty amazing. You can lose quite a bit of liver, and it can actually repair itself. What else?
Your skin.
Your skin. Yep, constantly repairing itself. So the stomach, if the stomach didn't constantly repair itself, it would not be able to maintain the acid inside of it, and it is acidic. Anybody ever break a bone? That could right, skeletal organ that can replace itself. Some tissues that cannot mend, however, the nervous system, not good, and kidneys don't do a good job. Pancreas, another one that doesn't do well. So more often than not, our systems don't repair well. So local versus systemic harm. So some chemicals are going to actually just, either harm the exposure site or one specific target organ. Some might affect a whole system. For instance, our central nervous system is the brain and the brainstem. Then we've got the atomic system, which are all the nerve endings and everything else that runs through. Alcohol affects all those. It affects the whole entire system. And some can do both, right? So alcohol also can just affect the liver. So it can do the liver and the whole entire system. This is very important to understand. Do chemicals play well together? So how many people here think that an IUPAT member will only be exposed to one chemical at a time? Nobody's raising their hand, right? Often we're exposed to more than one chemical at one work shift, right? Or at one time. So how do those chemicals work together? And how do they combine or not combine to cause damage to our body? So we have a couple of definitions here. One's called an additive effect, one's a synergistic effect, one is an antagonistic effect, and the other is potentiation. And I'm going to give some numbers as a way to give an example, and I'm going to show some examples of chemicals and which way they interact. So an additive effect, it's just by simple addition. So here I got my example of 4 + 4 = 8. Hopefully we can all agree on that. I know I've heard the phrase often now, well, you've got your facts, I've got mine. But let's all agree that 4 + 4 = 8, right? This is two chemicals that interact in the body pretty much the exact same way, and they're going to just be added together, okay? A synergistic effect is much different. Here I've got 4 + 4 does not equal 8 anymore, it equals 13. So now I've got two chemicals, when they enter the body, they're going to greatly increase the outcome or the effect of the body. And it's not the same as adding, being an additive effect where, 4 + 4 = 8. Now they're going to somehow greatly increase, greater than the sum of their parts added together. Then I've got an antagonistic effect. So 4 + 4 = 5. So here the result is something less than what those two components together would do. And then a potentiation effect is one chemical by itself might cause some kind of interaction in the body. Another chemical doesn't do anything to the body whatsoever. But if they're together inside you, it's going to increase that other chemical and how it operates in your system, okay? So I've got some examples here. So alcohol that we might drink and organic solvents. These things act together additively. Its neurological effects, its effects on our skin. You can also have different organic solvents together. They're going to be additive. So MEK and acetone or toluene, if you're using all those things together, they're going to produce an additive effect in the body. A synergistic, so asbestos and cigarette smoking are two real common examples of this. Asbestos by itself, if you don't smoke and you work with it over a lifetime, I think your chance of getting lung cancer is, I want to say, 10 or 15% more than the general population. If you smoke and don't work with asbestos, your chance of getting lung cancer is, I think, 40% greater than that of the general population. If you do those two things together, your likelihood of developing lung cancer is 90%. So if I took my 10% for just working with asbestos, my 40% for just smoking, add those together, I should get 50, but that's not the case. They work synergistically to give a much higher probability of developing lung cancer. Antagonistic effects. How many people here have ever got like antibiotics and the doc says, hey, don't drink alcohol while you're on these because it's not going to really work. It's going to reduce its effects. So sometimes taking a chemical together with another chemical is going to reduce the impact on the body. And then sometimes you can have something like a chlorinated hydrocarbon, which doesn't affect the body that much or at all, with alcohol is going to greatly increase the effect of that alcohol. So these are important to understand when I'm doing that risk assessment of a job. And I'm looking at all those chemicals that a worker might be working with. If I see things that might act additively or synergistically or potentiating, I am concerned about that. I'm going to make sure I control these. Antagonistically is not so much of a concern, but it might be because, you don't know, every worker's personal life. They might be taking medication where if they happen to be working around an organic solvent, which mimics the effects of an alcohol, that's not going to be good for their recovery, right? With that drug they're taking. So you really got to do work in the beginning to find out what the risks are to workers. All right, we're just going to go through a couple examples of health effects and then do our activity. Oh, looks like my little dog joined me and is starting to eat something it shouldn't be. Anyway, so we're going to look at some things. There's some reasons that we are concerned about other than LD50 and LC50. So sometimes chemicals can displace air and can suffocate us through something called simple asphyxiation. There's a lot of different chemicals that act that way. So all they're going to do is they're going to displace air, okay? Anybody work around any of these chemicals up here? There's more simple asphyxiants than just this, but these are some common ones. Where do you think you would be more likely to suffer simple asphyxiation?
You're in a closed room with something.
What's that?
If you're in a closed environment with one of these.
Yep, absolutely. Working in a closed space, a confined space, and you happen to work with, one of these kinds of chemicals, you're more at increased risk. Then we've got chemical asphyxiation, which is a chemical that will interact with the body's ability to uptake oxygen. Does anybody have an example of a chemical asphyxiant? One I'm always concerned about for New Englanders if we have an ice storm that knocks out power. Carbon monoxide. Right, so this is a real common chemical to the general public. Product of incomplete combustion, we always have cases here where, somebody, when we get the power knocked out, they put the generator in their garage or they put it out right outside of a window. One time we lost power for 11 days and people were actually cooking with a gas grill indoors and we had carbon monoxide poisonings, and we had a few fatalities during that storm up in New England. But workers are around this stuff a lot. If you do anything that generates carbon monoxide from incomplete combustion, compressors, small motors, do IUPAT members work with anything that uses fuel, gas or diesel?
Yeah.
Right. So you could be at risk for that. And again, a pre-work, a risk assessment is going to help to do that. Sensitizers and allergens, what do these things do? And I think it was either Chantel or Jessica, one of you mentioned this example already. What does a sensitizer or allergen do to us?
Sensitizer, I think it can make you more sensitive to that chemical or other chemicals in the future after being exposed. And then,
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right, because our body does have some good defenses for when a chemical gets in there, and sometimes it knows what to do. So what happens when it sometimes is exposed to a respiratory hazard? Airways start to constrict, right? Tighten up. Maybe we cough. We're trying to prevent that bad stuff from getting into our lungs. But sometimes the body overdoes it, right? That's an example of why people have anaphylactic shocks where they have to carry an EpiPen, like with a bee sting or a nut allergy or something like that. Here, the body overdoes it, and it overdoes it to such an extent it's going to kill itself. So, you know, in other words, all right, we're not getting any air into our body, man. This stuff is going to kill us. We're going to shut all of our airways down. Well, hey, Mr. Brain or Mrs. Brain, what about getting oxygen into us? The lungs don't want to hear that. So this is a problem. And we've got, you know, upwards of 400 known chemicals that will either sensitize us or develop allergies to us, including occupational asthma. And if you get that, you don't get it back. Once you become sensitized, once you develop occupational asthma, you don't get rid of it. You now have to manage that disease for the rest of your life. And typically what will happen once you become sensitized or develop an allergy, smaller and smaller amounts of exposure are going to set you off. Any examples other than the ones I've mentioned?
Yeah, I was gonna say, my husband had two examples actually with just my husband. One was skin-wise, getting I'm trying to remember what it's called, where he gets little bumps all over his skin when he gets exposed to just you know, any sort of
Hives.
yeah, hives and yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And he didn't always get it, but he's gotten it really bad. Now, just a small exposure will cause him to break out and stuff. And on the same thing, he also has developed an allergy to shrimp and stuff like that. He can't eat it. And he wasn't always that way, but it's gotten worse and worse. And now eating a little bit will cause him to get sick. You know, he's not at the risk of, you know, dying, but still he gets sick every time.
Right. And you know, to your point, he needs to monitor that, because
Oh,
there
yeah.
could be
Yeah.
the time, right, when he
Yeah,
just
because he got
gets
sick on our
worse.
honeymoon, actually, and that's what I told him. Instead of saying, like, he was just figuring it out. He was like, I think I might have an allergy. And then when it happened on our honeymoon in New Orleans, I was like, you don't think anymore. We know you definitely have it. You need to stop eating this stuff. You need to accept that you have the allergy
Yeah.
because it's getting worse, you know. So
Did he identify what causes the skin reaction?
not yet. The skin reaction, I think it's mostly from solvents and stuff like that. And I don't know that it's hives because it's the little white raised bumps, not like the red ones.
So, I mean, it's not a bad idea to go to actual allergists and try to track
Yeah.
it down, because one is they're going to be able to do, you know, a blood workup and find out the levels of antibodies that are in the blood when,
Right.
you know, and that's important because based on those levels, they can tell if they're really reactive or not, or not that much. So it can give you a level of risk for, you know, being around those kinds of triggers. And then they
Right.
can monitor that, you know, every couple of years and see if it's getting worse or better. And that's important. So we had a cat for a long time, and you know, when the cat died, we didn't have one for a while, and it was in my mid 30s. I started getting allergic to cats, and now like I can't go around one without having, you know, a butyrol inhaler. It's ridiculous.
That sucks.
I'm one of those people now. Oh, you got the cats,
Wow.
put them away. So yeah, and so sensitizers and allergens are a pain in the butt, and they can be life-threatening, right? A good example. Thanks for sharing.
I'm not sure how true this is or not, Bernie, but I've been told in some CPR classes that I have taken that your body changes every 7 years. And that could be a cause of you becoming allergic to something,
Yeah.
or vice versa. Something that you were allergic to, you end up not being allergic to it anymore.
Yeah, I don't know what the time frame is specifically, but that can happen. Like you know, one of my kids has a nut allergy, and when it was first discovered, the doc said, "Look, you know, she might outgrow it, and that's why we keep testing to see, you know, how that's done." It has gone down, but it hasn't disappeared. You know, so you know, to her liking, she's like, "I ain't testing this," right? So yeah, that's a good point, Nuno. Yep. All right, so corrosives, you know, acids and bases, these things are going to damage, you know, anything from tissue to material on contact, right? That's, you know, and some of them are more corrosive than others. There's a reason why they use, you know, hydrofluoric acid to etch steel, right? And, you know, we use, you know, hydrochloric acid, muriatic acid to, you know, to etch concrete, things like that. These things are pretty powerful, and just think of what they can do to the skin. Mutagens, Got a good old picture of Godzilla in there. So these are things that are actually going to change the makeup of your DNA, and it gives potential to pass that on to offspring. And also mutagens can lead to cancer. A couple examples we have is ionizing radiation. And if you're more interested in ionizing radiation and Godzilla, come back when we do the rad intro to radiation class and the health effects one. Teratogens, these are an unfortunate group of chemicals. What is a teratogen? Teratogens are chemicals that will affect the fetus as it develops in the mother's womb, causing birth defects of all kinds, including, motor skill developmental effects, physical, effects, learning, all kinds of stuff. These are my kids when they were tiny. Well, my son's almost bigger than I am now. But as I told him, it's gonna be a while before he's stronger than dad is. But we want to really make sure that when we're working around chemicals, we don't bring them home to our families, because we've got boatloads of studies with lead and asbestos that what we bring home can really affect our kids because they don't need as much, or if you are pregnant or hoping to become pregnant, you really need to know what you're working around, because that can have some significant outcomes, if you are exposed to that stuff. A couple examples, methylmercury and phentoin. So methylmercury poisoning, really good example in Minamata Bay, Japan in the 50s. There was a company that used methylmercury as a catalyst. So a catalyst is a chemical that you add to a chemical process to speed it up. It doesn't actually make the stuff, doesn't add to it. The only thing it does is it speeds up the process. And sometimes it will be used up and not be effective anymore. And so in this company in Minamata Bay, they were just dumping this methylmercury-based catalyst into the ocean. And Japanese are a heavily seafood-based culture. And so there was incredible poisonings, and these were teratogens. And it was all photographed, captured historically, multiple birth defects, not just of humans, but animal, dogs and cats as well. And if you're interested in how, this affected this population, just, look up Minamata Bay poisoning. And it also occurred in 1974 in, I think in either Iraq or Iran. They used a pesticide-based methylmercury pesticide, and they treated a grain with it to go out and then plant. But the distributor took the wrong bags. So they took the methylmercury-based pesticide grain and used that for food distribution to bake bread with. And they used the other stuff to plant. And so there was some methylmercury poisoning through that food source in the 70s. Again, either in Iraq or Iran. I can't remember which one now. But that's particularly nasty stuff. And then cancer, anything that can cause cancer, disrupts the oncogenes. These are two genes in our body that prevent cell growth to occur out of control. And if those things get damaged, we can develop cancer. And there's no known safe level for carcinogen. The CDC states any exposure you get increases your risk. The more exposure, the more risk. There's no known safe exposure for a teratogen. There's no known safe exposure for a mutagen. The more you get, the higher your risk goes up. So we try to shoot for zero exposure to these things. Here's just a couple examples: asbestos, benzene, beryllium, cadmium, cigarette smoke, vinyl chloride. But I could fill up slide after slide after slide. There are so many carcinogenic compounds that we know of right now that we work with. It would take up a class just to talk about those. All right, so the effects the chemical has on the body depends on several things: the physical form of the chemical, how the chemical enters the body. Remember, I gave you the example of elemental lead, difference between breathing it in and inhaling it. inhaling it, breathing it in, or ingesting it. Also the physical form. So methylmercury, I gave you that example for teratogens. Elemental mercury, the stuff that you see in a thermometer, that does not have the same toxic effect in our body as methylmercury does. It's still very bad, but not as bad as methylmercury. The dose of the chemical, so how much you get into, how the toxic the chemical is, so its potency, right? We mentioned that before. Individual issues, characteristics, age, sex, race, weight, underlying conditions. And then chemicals can produce different health effects and sometimes can produce more than one, right? Oof. We made it, folks. We made it. Little training aspect here. So this does take about 2 hours to get through typically. If I had a face-to-face class, there would be typically, there's always more. I don't know if you've noticed this already, if you've, with your Zoom classes that you've taught, there's just less discussion and interaction on Zoom. There's always a lot more. And that's a good thing in face-to-face interaction, because we know through adult learning principles that that's a great way to make sure that our students are walking out with more information, is to get them to interact and discuss. But here we are, right, on Zoom. So it typically, though, does take anywhere between 1.5 hours and 2 hours to do. And now we've got an activity. So were folks able to download and get this activity? Okay, so what I'd like us to do, what's that?
Did you print it out, or did you just happen to print it out?
I happen to print it out just because, again, going through it, I want to be able to answer questions. But since we've only got a few people, what I'd like to do is the way that I developed this activity. It kind of goes hand in hand with the chemistry class that I did. And we're going to look at the other things in the pocket guide here that deal more with toxicology and health effects. So we're going to use a pocket guide. And I've got, how many activities do I have here? Looks like I've got 5 different groups. So let's say, if you had a class of 20, break them out into groups of 4, or however you see fit to do that. We're just going to take one of these for now. So I've got, a table here, and each table, it's going to be a bunch of codes. And these are all randomized, and there's different codes in each table. And you're going to look those up in the pocket guide. And this is a way to become more familiar with these. And as I said before, as much as I use this thing, I still don't remember all the acronyms. I have to continuously look them up. But it's helpful to be able to look them up quickly, especially if you're a trainer, you're teaching a class, you want to be able to reach the stuff fast. So we've got some practice with this. And in the column that says definition or explanation, you would say, what does ABS mean, right? And you define it, okay? And typically that's just looking up the definition of that acronym in the pocket guide. And then the significance. So the significance means, why is that important to you? Why is it important to know what absorption is of a chemical? Or why is it important to know what IDLH is for that chemical? What significance does it have for me as a worker, or you as a trainer, or an industrial hygienist, or whatever? Who cares about that term, right? We want to be able to connect it to occupational health and safety. And then next, there's a chemical that's selected for each different group. So I've got silica, I've got methylene chloride, I've got hydrofluoric acid, isocyanates, and MEK. For our group, I'd like us to do activity number 3. Boy, I don't know how I have this printed out. I'd like you to take the one that is for MEK, for methylene chloride. And what you're going to do for that is you would have students look up what the ER is, which are exposure routes for MEK. You'd have them look up, for methylene chloride. You'd have them look up SY. And then you also have them look up TO, which is target organs. And then you'd want the students to be able to look up and research one historically significant occupational or environmental exposure event that happened. For instance, if I were to have a group do silica, one great historical effect that I always talk about is the Hawk's Nest down in West Virginia. And if anyone's familiar with Hawk's Nest, it was a tunnel that was built oh gosh, the time now escapes me. I want to say either in the late 1800s or early 1900s. And the rock, the soil that they were digging through to make this tunnel was almost 100% crystalline silica. So instead of workers developing silicosis or lung cancer and dying, 15, 20 years, they were developing it within 6 months. So the Hawk's Nest tragedy was connected to silica exposure. So I'd like, students to be able to look up something that's significant for that chemical and relate it to either an occupational exposure event or one that might have occurred in the public realm, that affected a community or something like that. And that's the activity. And then I would have everybody, report back and talk about what they found, if they had any issues looking things up in the pocket guide, and also what chemical they chose and what their historical significant event was. So with that said, why don't we just, again, we're going to stay in one group. I'm going to go take a quick break and grab something to drink while you guys are working on it. If we did have, a class of 20 or 25 and we were face to face, I would have this go for a full 45 minutes, 30 minutes for work, 15 minutes for report back. But I'd like us to take just 10 minutes to do the work together in one group. And then we'll just take a few minutes to report back our findings. So again, I want folks to do methylene chloride. Okay, so take the group number that's associated with methylene chloride, which I think is group number 2. Okay, any comments or questions?
Yes,
All
so
right.
we definitely need the NIOSH pocketbook for this, right?
Yes, yep, the NIOSH pocket guide. And when you're looking up your historical event for methylene chloride, the old Google, right? Or if you got any other reason.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, because I'm actually working from home, so I don't have a NIOSH pocket guide here.
We should have, you should be able to access one from they actually have a good online pocket guide, NIOSH pocket guide in a PDF, but hopefully your group members aren't going to leave you out in the cold, All right, folks, I'll see you in about 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, I just Googled pocket guide and there was like a search engine that came up on NIOSH's website.
It is, so it's the FTI 49 class, I think. I just lost
Yeah,
it, but if you have,
1149.
yeah.
Yep.
So if you haven't gotten in there in a while, take a deep breath before you go in there. It should still be, everything just sort of looks a little different. It should still be in your dashboard, and you should be able to go to the survey and click it. Like I said, we tested it, but certainly if you guys run into any questions, you can just let me know, and run into any issues, just let me know. But yeah. And then I'll shamelessly plug, Bernie, our classes that are coming up, because this seems like a good group that keeps coming. So I just, while we were here, we sort of laid out the February classes. So we're going to be doing another respiratory protection class. So we did one of those back, I think, in the summertime, July, August, sometime. So we're going to do a respiratory protection class February the 3rd. And also February 23rd. We're going to be doing the air monitoring and exposure course that Bernie mentioned. That's a brand new one, as well as radiation classes. So we've got radiological fundamentals. Yes, I said it. Part 1 on February the 16th. That's a Tuesday. And then part 2 of that. So sort of the continuation. Biological effects of radiation. That's going to be on Wednesday, February 17th. So we've kind of sprinkled this. We also have air monitoring and exposure. Did I say that one? That's a new one as well. That's February 9th. And then we're going to do our good and faithful lead awareness at the end of the month, probably on the 24th of February. if you guys too, like Jesse and Chantel, I don't know if they're going to want you to do more health and safety, but we're going to do an OSHA 502, I'm sorry, an OSHA 510 virtually as
I
well.
do need a book, the OSHA 500. So, okay, awesome. Cool.
Yeah, so we're gonna do the 510 at the end of the month, and then we'll probably do, because we want to do the 510 virtually, we would really like to do the 500 in person. So that probably wouldn't be until probably May if Bernie has anything to do with it at the FTI. But that's the plan. So any of these classes that kind of require follow-up as well, we'll schedule those early summer at the FTI so everybody can come up for it. So just a teaser, we'll send that out to the DOT sometime next week as far as these open classes, but
Okay.
there you guys have a list and can give everybody a heads up. Bernie, did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
All right, thank you all. Let me know seriously if you guys have any issues with the surveys, but everything should be good.
All right,
Nicole,
everybody.
can you hear me?
Look at
Yeah.
everyone. Appreciate it.
This is Angelo. Question